Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'll start us off right now. My name is Dylan Cunningham, and I'm an assistant project manager on the NYSun team. And I'm also joined by Chris Rogers, and we're excited to be sharing info about the pre-development program with you all today. So I'll start by going over some housekeeping rules for WebEx. All participants will remain muted during the webinar. If at any point you have a question or comment, please feel free to let us know using the Q&A feature in WebEx, and we will get to all questions towards the end of the webinar. Just a little background, we created the Pre-Development Program Quarterly Webinar Series to create an ongoing open platform to share information about the program with interested stakeholders and sort of have an open discussion with everyone that's interested. We like to make these as dynamic as possible, so some webinars will highlight past pre-development grant recipients, and others will go over other resources and topics as they become relevant. So I will go over the agenda. Today we'll start with the program overview, followed by program updates and supported activities, as well as how to apply. And then we'll get into sort of the latter half of the webinar with other NYSERDA programs and resources for multifamily buildings that we want to sort of make everyone aware of, in addition to this program, of course. And then we'll end with the Q&A and answer any questions, and then talk about future webinars in this series. So thank you again for joining us, and I'll hand it over to Chris Rogers.
Thanks, Dylan. And so I guess just kicking things off, going to the next slide. So the first thing we'll just talk through is just a quick background on what is NYSun. NYSun is the overall solar program that NYSERDA operates. Originally, there was the goal of installing 3 gigawatts of distributed solar in the state of New York by 2022, and it has increased to 6 gigawatts of solar by 2025. The big highlight that is supporting this program, in addition to existing support for low to moderate income solar that exists from the beginning of the NYSun program, there was also a new commitment of adding funding that will benefit low to moderate income households, environmental justice communities, and disadvantaged communities, which is really what supports the pre-development program, as well as other related programs that I'll be getting into later in the webinar. Next slide. Also, as a brief background as to what the pre-development program is, the pre-development program is the shorthand for PON, Program Opportunity Notice 3414, Affordable Solar and Storage Pre-Development and Technical Assistance Program. The applications have been accepted since last summer and will continue to be accepted on a calendar quarterly basis through the end of 2024. The grants for this program are scaled to the scope of, or intended to be scaled to the scope of the benefit of the projects that are submitted and go up to $200,000. They are intended to benefit community-led solar and storage projects that are benefiting affordable housing, as well as low to moderate income households, environmental justice communities, and disadvantaged communities. One of the big rules for the program are the eligible applicants. It's intended to focus on multifamily affordable housing providers, as well as community-based organizations and agencies, as well as technical service providers that focus on supporting regulated affordable housing. Eligible projects can be located anywhere within the state of New York, which is different from most other NYSERDA programs, which are mostly restricted to everywhere in the state except for Long Island, and also some restrictions for municipal electricity service areas. The projects can be located anywhere. Next slide. So moving on into the overall review process, as we've intended to structure these webinars from the beginning, they're intended to be aligned with upcoming submission deadlines. As I mentioned before, there's a calendar quarterly schedule, and so the next upcoming deadline will be the end of this month on June 30th. The next one will be September 30th, followed by December 31st. Applications may be reviewed prior to the quarterly deadlines, but in general, they will be reviewed in the order in which are received after the submission deadline. Additional information typically after submission may be requested from the applicant to supplement the overall application, and typically there's a notification of the award or decision by the review committee within 4 to 6 weeks after the quarterly deadline. Once projects pass the approval phase by the review committee, they transition into a work plan finalization phase, and that can take an additional 4 to 6 weeks as there's a large focus on the work plan. Next slide. The next slide is just something that you can screenshot, although the slides for this webinar as well as a recording will be uploaded to the program webpage for this program afterwards, and so you'll be able to download this. But if you wanted to keep just a screenshot of what the timeline is for for this program. Next slide. And lastly, just going through the slide here, again, this will be something to refer to if you're considering submitting an application, just a few key terms that are relevant for this program. The first is to what is considered regulated affordable housing, which are intended to be the primary benefits of this program. It's typically multifamily housing, although it also includes, particularly in the upstate region, portfolios of single family homes that are intended to serve households that are at or below 80% of the area median income. Next slide. And then these are some other key terms that are important to refer to when thinking about the eligibility for the application. And I would strongly encourage folks who have any questions as to, does my organization qualify either as a manager of multifamily affordable housing? What are the entities that count as technical service providers? How does that work in terms of leading an application or being part of an application? This is just a brief overview, but I would also encourage you to reach out if you have any more specific questions. And with that out of the way, we'll transition into program updates. Next slide. So I guess this slide is maybe slightly misleading in that we don't have anything official to announce as of today, but a significant update that will be happening for the program in between now and the next likely will happen before the September 30th submission deadline, will be the introduction of a new incentive that is focused on low to moderate income households and disadvantaged communities, which is referred to as the Inclusive Community Solar Adder. And I wanted to flag that for your attention, that once that added incentive, which provides additional financial incentives to projects that dedicate a portion of their capacity to low to moderate or community solar projects, a portion of their capacity to low to moderate income households, that we believe there's a lot of good potential overlap between that added incentive and the pre-development program, and there will likely be some changes in that the projects that will be going after the adder will potentially could be a good fit for the pre-development program as well. And so there will be some changes that will be included in the program solicitation summary, which describes the full list of rules for the program. And so as of right now, no change in the review process, but I just want to flag that for everyone's attention before we move on into what now is going to be an overview of the supported activities. Next slide. And just one more. Thanks, Dylan. And so what I want to go through now is one of the most common questions that we receive about the pre-development program are what sort of projects can be supported under this program. There's a wide range of organizations that will reach out to NYSERDA with questions about ideas that they have for projects, and while there are some restrictions as to what it is that NYSERDA can say in advance of an application submission and before a project has been reviewed by the committee that looks at all applications. In general, the most of the applications and the activities that I guess that we see projects come in are focused on the overall business model, either for ownership or for determining what would be the full economic benefit to the low to moderate income households, including the affordable housing provider that oversees or manages the property where the solar projects, either where the solar projects storage might be sited, or if there would be the benefit of off-site community solar projects. Typically it's early stage project planning, and so projects that are ready for implementation are not that far off from PTO, are not typically a good fit. This is intended to help the identification of ideal locations where a solar storage project would be built. What would be the appropriate partners for the entities that are involved to work with in terms of submitting an application. For example, if you're an HDFC co-op and you're interested in going solar, but you there's no in-house expertise, and so you're looking for an organization that can guide you through the project development, or maybe provide some assistance on what are the full benefits, and explain that a pre-development grant could be used to help set that up. And one of the other main activities, especially for community solar projects, where the challenge in finding households and signing those up and subscribing those customers to a community solar project, e- establishing the administrative infrastructure for monitoring and ongoing outreach to households that would be signed up for them, and making sure that they match the right profile. If you have a targeted percentage of low to moderate income households. And so there's a lot of focus on outreach and engagement and designing of those materials in pre-development programs, and or I guess in applications to the pre-development program. And all of those activities can be supported under grants. Next slide. There's some more complicated activities that, maybe that's not to say that conducting a citywide or a countywide or multi-county outreach campaign is not simple, but there are other activities that are also eligible under that we often have questions about, and that we see applications for. And that's related to the overall or various stages of the procurement process, either for the solar storage installer, for any other related entities that would be involved in this. There's a wide range of financial analysis, in terms of, if you're targeting a certain level of savings, how can you figure out, what would be the best business model, and getting to a financial close. Those are there's there's a wide range of activities there that are included in there. What's not stated on this slide, but we always we try to do our best to make clear, is that while there's a limited range of activities under that can fit under the umbrella of site assessment work, in terms of a preliminary site assessment of establishing that a property is structurally sound, or working with the building owner to secure site access. And there's necessarily some level of degree of engineering activities that are included in that. The pre-development program is not intended to cover the cost of, the full cost of system design and engineering. And so there's a wide range of activities, for permitting, or interconnection or engineering costs that would not be covered through grant or grant funds under this program. There's intended to be a narrow exception for preliminary site assessment and for site assessment work, but beyond that, uh, that likely would not be an approved activity under this program. And so next slide. Now we're going to move into how to apply to this program. And the next slide, it's fairly brief, but there's a few other components that that maybe could be more clear on the solicitation summary on the program web page, as well as the program opportunity notice page that includes all of the attachments that you would submit. The first that I wanted to, apart from stating that all applications are submitted online through an online portal, it's a fairly straightforward web page where you would upload documents, and there's not apart from the minimum attachments that you're supposed to submit that are all on the PON 3414 page, you are not restricted from including additional documentation that you believe would be helpful to your application to provide context to the reviewers. That includes letters of support, any documentation related to preliminary work or assessments that have been done towards the project. If you're a technical service provider, this would be, there's a field for additional documents. This is where you would include letters indicating, I guess documenting how it is that you have partnered with an affordable housing provider. That could be that if you sign some sort of MOU, or it could be something less formal than that document, but something that to establish that the organization that will be submitting the grant, whether that be a law firm or an engineering firm, that the way that they're meeting the eligibility requirements for the intended recipients is through some sort of partnership with an affordable housing organization, and detailing what that would be. Similarly, I wanted to indicate that, you know, our intent is not, although we've created standard template forms for the submitting of the applications. I think the downloaded, or all the documents that you download, they're all fillable PDFs, and I think there's some restrictions on, well, I wouldn't say restrictions, but for the work plan document that gets submitted, there's a set number of milestones that are included in that, but we're not intending to restrict applicants into the number of milestones that they would include. If you would like to include more, you know, it's perfectly fine to edit the document, so that you can add additional content, if that's not fitting, and if you have some issues with the templates that we've provided, please do reach out. Once you submit an application, everything through the portal, there's an automated email message that you get back, where when you click that link, you'll be able to see all of the documents and attachments that you have submitted. If there's something that goes wrong, there's no penalty for resubmitting. You can resubmit, and then please reach out to us to let us know that there was something wrong with the earlier submission, so that we have everything in one place, and that will make it easy to share those documents with others. And so now in this presentation, next slide, we're going to transition into a relatively brief overview of other resources at NYSERDA that benefit multifamily housing. And to give a little bit of background there, while the NYSun team and the focus of the pre-development program is primarily on solar projects, it has been expanded to also include storage projects that would benefit environmental justice communities, multifamily affordable housing, etc. There are a range of other activities that are not specifically limited to solar that would benefit multifamily affordable housing. And the intent of this next section is to provide a brief overview, as well as links to other resources that you may pair with a pre-development grant. Many of them would stack with each other. They're intended braided together and to work well on different aspects that managers and operators of multifamily housing would find interesting and useful, and additional financial support. And so, with that, I'm going to transition it or send things back to Dylan to go through this section.
Thanks, Chris. And like Chris just said, we'll briefly just wanted to bring these to your attention and give you sort of links to follow for more information and people to reach out to if you're interested in these programs. So the first one that we'll share is the Flexible Technical Assistance Program. And this helps buildings complete energy studies that can help identify and evaluate opportunities to reduce energy costs and incorporate clean energy in capital planning. So it does this through a cost share model. So eligible projects can get 50% cost share of the energy audit and other studies. And this can be combined with other MPP incentives, which is the Multifamily Performance Program that we'll go into in another slide. And so if this sounds like something that you're interested in, you can visit the link that's on the bottom of this slide. And as a reminder, we'll make these slides available so you can follow the links for more information. The next program that we wanted to bring to your awareness is also a cost share program. It's the On-Site Energy Manager program. And this allows eligible contractors to hire on-site energy managers. And again, NYSERDA would cost share part of the salary. So in some cases, that can be up to 75% that NYSERDA shares with the property. And there are certain requirements that projects have to meet in order to receive this cost share. The next program is the Multifamily Performance Program. So this program provides incentives per unit for affordable housing, affordable multifamily property owners and managers to make improvements in their buildings. So this is a comprehensive energy efficiency program. And again, there are certain requirements that projects must meet, and one of them is at least 15% energy savings relative to the building's energy use. There's also a network of multifamily building solutions providers that eligible projects can use and utilize. And for more information, you can visit their website. Retrofit New York is spearheading the creation of scalable solutions that will sort of benefit multifamily buildings. And so it's building owners and developers, as well as solution providers and manufacturers, can utilize Retrofit New York's database to sort of view what some of those standardized and scalable solutions are to date. The Real-Time Energy Management Program is another cost share program for installation and ongoing support for real-time data monitoring and analytics. This is great for buildings that want to take advantage of this sort of relatively new smart building technology. And next, this is also, like I said, a cost share of between 20 to 33% for eligible projects. And this covers hardware installation and 3 years of ongoing support. And you can visit their website down there for more information. And one of the last programs that we'll highlight is the Buildings Operation and Maintenance Workforce Development Training Program. So this is one of the several workforce development training programs offered by NYSERDA. And this one is specifically offered to help buildings improve the skills of their operators and maintenance workers. So again, this program allows sort of up to 50% cost share of projects that meet the requirements. And on the next slide here, we provide links to easily access all of these programs, and you can utilize these links when the slides are available on the Predevelopment program page. And again, if you have any questions, we encourage you to reach out to the contacts on each of these pages for more information. Chris, I'll go back just to see if there's anything I missed there before we go into Q&A.
Thanks, Dylan. But I think we can transition to the Q&A portion now. So the in this section of the webinar, you know, please do add your questions in the Q&A feature of WebEx. We'll try to address as many questions as are added in there, within the available time, as well as answer some questions that were previously submitted by other interested parties. And so I'll start things off with a question that was made about the interconnection cost and the potential availability of low interest loans to extend the high cost of interconnection as opposed to making it upfront. This is the interconnection costs are one of several barriers that face anyone who's attempting to develop a solar project in the state of New York, which is just an additional barrier for regulated affordable housing and multifamily affordable housing providers. And unfortunately, the pre-development program does not is not intended to cover the cost of interconnection. There's a limited exception to that, in that the cost of the initial interconnection application reviews, those can be, those costs can be covered by a pre-development grant, but you'd need something much larger, even, than you know, in addition to a range of activities, you'd need something larger than the cap for of $200,000 in many cases to cover these costs. And so the pre-development program is intended to focus other areas. What I can say is that in recent years and most recently, there have been ongoing efforts to reduce the cost of interconnection. The first was the availability of the interconnection maps and the improvements in terms of updating those so that any interested parties and developers can see, where there are areas of opportunity. And the most significant, perhaps, change that is very new is in the sharing of interconnection costs. And you'll have to forgive me for not being fully up to date on where he stands in this process, but I believe that it's either in the process of approval or it has been approved to allow multiple developers to share the interconnection costs, and instead of putting the full cost of replacing a transformer on one entity, on one party, those costs can be shared against multiple people. And again, that's still upfront, and so that doesn't fully address the request for spreading it out, but it does reduce the barrier to entry somewhat. The the next question is about how can you obtain a list of affordable housing facilities that I guess that rent apartments to low to moderate income households. So NYSERDA does not at this time, it does not have a publicly available, this multifamily housing database. There's been work as part of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act in terms of providing publicly available information, though, for disadvantaged communities. And that information is currently, there's a database for through the Open Data New York website that does provide some information on it's not the zip codes, where there's a database of the location of the disadvantaged communities, which can be used as potentially as a proxy for the location of the multifamily affordable housing. And so for anyone who's interested in the outreach component of finding potential customers, I don't have the link in front of me right now, but I would encourage you to to reach out to me after the webinar, I can provide you a link to where that web page is, and that hopefully that might be helpful. And the next question is about the potential of the Green Bank extending loans for developers for the financing of interconnection costs. And so, to be fully transparent, I'm not fully familiar with the different facilities and the different targets of the Green Bank for their development loans, and I do believe they do have, I mean, they have a mandate, just like the rest of New York for committing funding to disadvantaged communities and low to moderate income households. I'd be happy to put you in contact with someone at the Green Bank to discuss the possibility of an interconnection-based facility, although I'm not 100% certain that their their grants are focused on those areas. Um, the the next question that I wanted to address, which was something that was submitted beforehand, which is a fairly common question, are for the eligibility of applicants and how can a technical service provider that is an organization that is not focused on the management or the ownership of multifamily affordable housing, how can they be the lead applicant, or can they be a lead applicant? So I guess the first part is yes, a technical service provider can be a lead applicant on an application, whether that be a law firm or an engineering firm. In order to do so, though, there would need to be some sort of documentary proof to demonstrate that they have partnered with an owner or manager of affordable housing, that it's something that beyond that the entity has contacted them or has worked with them in the past. It would need to be clear from the application that the technical service provider is working in partnership with one of these organizations or community-based organizations that is very much part of the development team. Um, Another question is you know, about that we get fairly often is about site assessments and what type of site assessment activities and criteria are eligible funding. And so in general, the answer there is preliminary assessments. That could be a remote solar potential analysis. It could be a review of property data, looking at roof plans and age. It can be looking at the utility billing data, meter configurations, or it could be looking at potential issues related to interconnection that the property might have, and also which can be very significant for potential applicants would be um, any activities related to fully securing site control. And so if there are planned sites where you're intending to develop a solar and storage project, but you don't have site access agreements in place, you've spoken with some building owners or some property owners, but the goal there is to make it so that you can continue a lot of the pre-development and eventually development work. There's a range of activities there that you could look at. Um, the next question that was sent in is, well, the question specifically is about workforce development, but it applies also to other activities or benefits that are intended to be included as part of the overall projects. So the question, is workforce development an eligible use of program funding? And within the solicitation summary, it does state that we encourage applicants to include additional benefits or describe additional benefits beyond the solar and storage, the savings from that will go to low to moderate income households. And so if there's a plan to include workforce development and training in that you should include that within the the overall project application. And what I can say to that component of it is that the review committee for all applications, when they're assessing an application for what will be the benefits to low to moderate income households, to disadvantaged communities, to environmental justice communities, they're looking at the totality of what an applicant is proposing to do. And so an application that includes a solar installation, it will be assessed on one scale, whereas an application that is perhaps the same size or will have the same economic benefit, but also includes a workforce development and training will be reviewed more positively. And so the the kind of fine line to walk is that, unfortunately there are some restrictions on eligible activities. The grant's not intended to cover uh, installation, labor, or hardware costs. There are also other ponds that NYSERDA operates to support workforce development and training, and the intention is for interested applicants to use those available sources of funding to more directly cover the labor cost. At the same time, an application that is including additional benefits that aren't necessarily covered under a pre-development grant, whether that be workforce development and training, the intention to include the EV charging stations, the intention to do a range of activities of maybe perhaps including energy efficiency that will ultimately benefit an application. And so the next, I'll pause there to see if there are other questions. So here's a question that we got about what type of activities related to project financing. And so the intent of the grant is to help support all of the activities related to sourcing, structuring, or and getting to close, whether that be finding an appropriate tax equity investor or provider, for determining the best model for the project, working out what sort of credit enhancement will be available for the project, and I guess that could also potentially include sometimes the appropriate ownership model for the project. And so this is another one of the areas where there's a fairly wide range of activities that might occur in the pre-development phase that the the grants can be used to support. And I would encourage you to reach out if you had any more questions about ideas, and we can speak about those more generally about about what would work and whether or not that likely would not work. So I will pause there to see if there are more questions either about the pre-development program or about, you can try to answer questions about the other programs that are intended to benefit multifamily housing. So here's a question that applies both to other multifamily housing programs and whether that be the multifamily performance program or the flex tech program. And the question is, are the grants for the pre-development program are they reduced or reflected anyway on funding or restrictions that you get from other NYSERDA programs? And so I think the in general the the restrictions that would apply to pre-development grants and pairing them with other support from NYSERDA programs, whether that be the low-rise new construction program, retrofit New York, etc., are related to double funding the same activities. And so if there are actions or activities that are to be supported by other NYSERDA programs, then you would not be able to support that, or you would, I guess the review committee, they when they're assessing the overall application, they will not include that in terms of one of the overall benefits of the pre-development program because it is viewed to have been already supported and funded by a separate NYSERDA program. And so this is, you know, a a related area or question that wasn't asked, but where this comes up and can be relevant is at this point, there have been over 20 pre-development grants that have supported a wide range of properties and projects across the state of New York. There are some repeat applicants and recipients of pre-development grants. And the same restriction on double funding activities that would apply to other NYSERDA programs would apply to previous NYSERDA programs. And so if a property has been assessed in the past, if there was an entity that worked with an organization, affordable housing provider, you would, that those activities, the restriction there is, and this is not specific to the pre-development programs, a NYSERDA general rule where projects cannot be doubly funded. Another question is how are the grant amounts determined so that we can understand the amount ahead of time while working on a project? The the intent of the program and the way that the reviewers assess the projects is that the projects that receive or that will result likely in a higher amount of benefits to low to moderate income households, and they communicate that either through their the establishment of their team, their overall project goals, and they can show they communicate how the project will a solar project or a solar and storage project will be built and what the savings will be. They've explained what their how they'll be able to build the projects in a particular location. That gets into the feasibility assessment. I would say that there's a within the solicitation summary, there's a section that describes what the criteria that a project is assessed by. And so the reviewers are looking at that at that overall criteria, and the more improved feasibility, the higher the amount of benefits, the higher the funding will be. That's not intended to be a negative judgment of projects, but this means that a if an applicant were scaling the scope of their goals relatively, on a smaller scale, supposing that they were intending to use a pre-development grant to find the right partners to work with, then they would not be barred from submitting an application that is solely focused on finding the right partners. Of course, and a grant that is intended to find the appropriate project team would get a much lower level of funding than a project that is communicated and established how they have secured sites to build a certain capacity of solar and storage, and communicate how the team has the experience and will get to those goals, and will be providing a large amount of direct benefits to a large number of low to moderate income households. Those sort of grants would likely be awarded a much higher funding than a project that has a smaller scale or set of goals. And I will pause there to see if there's other questions that have come in. So I'm not seeing any new questions come in at this time, and so I guess we can maybe wrap things up. The final slides of the presentation will include our contact information. So as a just a brief reminder, again, the slides and a recording of the webinar will be uploaded to the program webpage for this program. And the intent and the plan at this time is to continue to host these calendar quarterly webinars aligned with the submission times for or submission dates for the overall program. Next slide. In addition to, if you received I guess a link to this program or a notification of this, and you have colleagues who are interested in signing up for notifications, both for future webinars and as well as other NYSERDA activities that would impact regulated affordable housing, please go to the nyserda.ny.gov/NYSun and go to the contact us page, and that will allow you to sign up for the notification and emails, as that will also provide you with information on new NYSERDA programs that are coming out. And so with that, that concludes the last slides of the presentation are in an appendix section that provide more details on how to apply. But that concludes this presentation. I would strongly encourage you to reach out to NYSERDA and to me if you have any questions about how this program works. I'll be following up with folks who had a few other questions, and requested some of the information. I'm going to put my email address in the chat because I did think that was on the last page, but just so folks have it. But it's just my first and last name at nyserda.ny.gov. But thank you all for attending this webinar. I hope that you found it informative, and I look forward to speaking with you all in the future.
Thank you.